They thought humiliating her in front of everyone would break her. The crowd gathered in the courtyard, their voices low, but their expressions eager to watch what was about to unfold. She stood in the center, her hands at her sides, her head slightly lower. The air was thick, people with tension, every pair of eyes locked on her. There was no kindness in the faces around her, only judgment and cruel amusement. They believed she had no strength, no power, nothing that could make her stand tall against them. She was quiet, soft-spoken, rarely drawing attention to herself, and that silence had made her an easy target to them. They thought breaking her in front of everyone would be easy. They thought taking away her dignity would make her disappear. Voices in the crowd grew louder, whispers turning into laughter. Someone called out to hurry it along, and a ripple of agreement moved through the onlookers. A few people shifted uneasily, but none stepped forward to stop what was about to happen. The ones at the center, the ones determined to humiliate her, moved closer, their smirks wide, their words sharp, stood perfectly still, her breathing calm, her shoulders relaxed. She did not look at the crowd, she did not look at the ones trying to intimidate her. She looked straight ahead, her eyes fixed on something far away, as if she was not even in that courtyard. The people around her did not notice the quiet strength in her posture, they only saw what they wanted to see. Simeon stepped forward, his voice louder than the rest, his words meant to provoke her, to force her to react, but she gave no reaction at all. The lack of response frustrated him, and he moved closer. The crowd leaned forward, waiting for the moment she would flinch, the moment she would break. But she did not move, she did not speak, she simply waited. Every second that passed made the crowd more restless, the tension rising as they expected her to beg, to plead, to resist in some way, but she remained still and calm. Her silence was heavier than any words could have been. A few of the onlookers began to shift uncomfortably. They could not explain why her calmness made them uneasy. It was as though she knew something they did not, as though she understood how this moment would end far better than anyone else there. The man at the center, still determined, took another step forward, ready to begin. Laughter returned, but it was uneasy now. There was something about the way she stood there, something unshaken and unafraid. The kind of stillness that made even the loudest voices falter for a brief moment. No one could name it, but the feeling was there. She was not the one at risk of breaking. The ones standing in front of her, where Esh stood still, her expression calm. As whispers filled the room, the crowd did not know what to make of her silence. They had expected anger or fear or desperation, but she gave them nothing. Her stillness unsettled them even more than any resistance could have. The laughter that had started as cruel confidence now began to sound thinner, weaker, as if they were trying to convince themselves they were still in control. The man closest to her took a step back without realizing it, his hand twitching slightly, his voice louder now, as if volume could make up for the unease creeping into his chest. Another voice from the crowd shouted something sharp, but it fell flat against the growing tension. The people at the edges of the gathering started exchanging glances, each one feeling something shift in the air. She looked up then, her gaze steady, her eyes calm, not defiant, but unshaken. The moment her eyes met theirs, the noise in the room faltered. The sound of nervous shifting replaced the earlier confidence. It was not the gaze of someone about to break, it was the gaze of someone who had already decided the outcome long before this moment had arrived. The ones at the center moved closer again, determined to go through with what they had started, but every step felt heavier than it should. Every inch closer to her seemed to tighten the air in the room. Someone in the back whispered to another, asking why she was not afraid, why she was just standing there waiting. It was a question no one could answer. Her silence was no longer just silence, it was pressure, it was weight pressing down on each person. Watching, the more she stood calm, the more their certainty began to crumble. The leader of the group felt his throat dry as he gave another order to continue, but his voice cracked just enough for the crowd to notice. A ripple of unease spread through the onlooker. Slowly straightened, her posture not by much, just enough to shift the balance in the room. Her shoulders rolled back, her head lifted slightly. The change was small, but the effect was powerful. The laughter stopped completely, now replaced by a strange hush that no one had expected. Her calm presence felt like something solid, something immovable. No one could name the reason, but the feeling was undeniable. There was something about her that none of them understood: the stillness, the patience, the way she allowed them to proceed without a single protest. It did not feel like surrender, it felt like she was letting them walk into something they were not ready for, and though they did not know it yet, every step forward was bringing them closer to the moment they would regret. A sudden movement revealed the tattoo carved down her spine. The air seemed to shift the moment the fabric slipped. The room, which had been filled with uneasy whispers only seconds before, now fell into a silence so heavy it felt unnatural. The faint sound of cloth brushing the floor echoed more than it should. Her back, now exposed to the entire crowd, the onlookers leaned forward, instinctively drawn by the sight. None of them expected anything beyond bare skin, perhaps a mark or scar, but what they saw was something entirely different: a design that stretched from the base of her neck down along her spine, each line sharp, each curve deliberate. It was not random, it was not decorative, it was something older, something that seemed to carry weight. Closest man froze in place, his mocking grin fading as his eyes fixed on the symbol. Another stepped closer, tilting his head as if he needed to see it again to believe it. The murmurs began again, but this time they were different. There was no laughter, no amusement, only low, uncertain voices. One person whispered something about having seen the symbol before. Another shook his head, insisting it was impossible. She remained still, letting the silence settle. Her shoulders squared, her breathing slow. She did not turn, she did not explain. The tattoo spoke for itself. It was unlike anything the crowd had seen yet. It felt strangely familiar, as if it belonged to a story they had all heard but never believed to be true, a story of someone powerful, someone untouchable. The ones who had pushed this humiliation forward began stepping back without realizing it, each step small, almost hesitant, their earlier confidence gone, their voices quiet. She did not move, she simply stood there, allowing them to take in what they were seeing. The design was intricate, the details sharp, almost like a code running down her spine. The tension in the air grew thicker every second. One man in the back, who had been silent the entire time, now spoke, his voice low but clear enough for others to hear. He recognized the mark. His words were enough to send another ripple through the crowd. The ones who heard him turned pale, their eyes wide as they looked from her back to her face, as if suddenly realizing who she might be. The laughter that had filled the courtyard earlier was now gone, completely replaced by an unease that no one could hide. The people who had come to watch humiliation now stood frozen, unsure of what to do. She did not move, she did not need to. The moment was already shifting in her favor. The tattoo had done what words could not. The design was unlike anything they had seen before, and the room went silent. The sharp black lines cut perfectly against her skin, every curve flowing into another, each symbol along her spine carved with purpose. It was not the work of an artist chasing beauty, it was the mark of something far more serious, something that carried history and power. With ethos who stood closest felt an unspoken heaviness settle over them, their eyes locked on the intricate shapes as if staring too long might reveal more than they wanted to know. Whispers began to ripple through the crowd, but now they were hushed, almost afraid to be heard. One man at the back spoke low to another, telling him he had seen that exact mark years ago on someone whose name still carried fur. The leader who had pushed her into the center now felt the weight of his decision. His voice caught in his throat as he tried to speak, the words not coming out. The people around him began to shift, glancing at each other, searching for some sign of what this mark truly meant. It was not just a tattoo, it was a symbol, one tied to stories of loyalty, power, and danger. Stood calm, her back still exposed, her presence unshaken. She had not spoken a word since the moment this started. She did not need to. Her silence was heavier than any explanation could be. Each second that passed made the air colder. The laughter from before now felt far away, like something that had happened in another lifetime. Samin stepped closer carefully, his expression changing from curiosity to unease. He raised a hand as if to touch the tattoo, but stopped halfway, his hand falling back to his side. The mark seemed untouchable, sacred in a way that kept even the boldest ones from crossing that line. No one dared to speak loudly, no one dared to challenge what they were seeing. A young soldier near the back whispered the name of the group tied to that mark, his voice trembling as he said it. Another man immediately turned too. him wide-eyed, warning him not to speak it again, but it was too late. The name spread in hushed tones, each person who heard it glancing toward her with a growing understanding this was not a woman to humiliate, this was someone connected to a power far beyond what any of them had imagined. The leader took a slow step back, his confidence gone completely, his smirk replaced by a pale face. He had wanted to embarrass her, but now he was the one exposed. The crowd was no longer watching her as a victim, they were watching her as someone they should never have crossed. Her calm stillness now carried the weight of authoritative. Mark on her spine was more than a design, it was a warning, and every person in the room had just realized it. Man stepped closer, recognizing the symbol, and his face turned pale. He did not speak at first, his breath caught in his chest, his eyes locked on the design as if staring at something dangerous. The crowd noticed the change in his expression. They leaned forward, curious but also uneasy. A few voices asked what he had seen, what the tattoo meant, but he shook his head, at first unwilling to say it aloud. The silence around him was thick, his hesitation making everyone more restless. The leader who had started the humiliation tried to demand an answer, but his voice lacked the weight it once carried. The man who recognized the mark finally spoke, his voice low, his tone almost careful, as he said that the symbol belonged to a group most people had only heard of in rumors, the kind of name that traveled in whispers, never spoken openly. The crowd shifted at once, every face turning toward her again as the meaning sank, and the ones who had been laughing earlier now stood stiff, their eyes wider, their confidence gone. The mark was tied to people known for their skill, their loyalty, and their silence. They were not the kind of people anyone wanted to provoke. The leader swallowed hard, realizing the mistake he had made. Desh stood in the center, unmoving, her back still exposed, the weight of the moment pressing on everyone else in the room. She did not confirm the man's words, she did not deny them either. Her silence made the truth heavier, it left them to wonder just how much danger they might be in for what they had done. The man who had spoken took a step back, still watching her carefully as though expecting her to react at any moment. He explained in a low voice that the tattoo was not just a mark, it was earned only after years of service and skill. It was not something a person could simply choose to wear. It was a sign of survival and deadly precision. Each line represented a stage completed, each curve a victory. Ones standing around her now began to feel the weight of every action they had taken leading to this moment, the humiliation, the laughter, the crowd. They were no longer looking at someone they thought was powerless, they were looking at someone who had the power to decide their fate, and that realization drained the color from more than one face. A hush fell over the courtyard again, no one daring to move, no one daring to speak. She slowly straightened her shoulders, her stillness commanding the room. Without a single word, the people around her now understood this was not the moment to challenge her, this was the moment to step aside. In that moment everyone realized she was someone they should never have crossed. The courtyard that had moments ago been filled with cruel laughter was now silent, every pair of eyes fixed on her as though seeing her for the first time. The leader, who had been so bold earlier, stood frozen, his mouth slightly open, his confidence gone completely. He looked like a man who wanted to speak but could not find a single word. Ones who had gathered to watch humiliation now stood as witnesses to their own mistake. They began stepping back without thinking, their movements slow, almost careful, as though afraid a sudden noise might set something off. Their earlier arrogance replaced by a growing fear. The name of the group tied to her tattoo whispered in every corner like a shadow crawling through the crowd. She turned her head slightly, not to speak, not to threaten, but simply to look over her shoulder. The sight of her calm, steady gaze was enough to make the leader look away, unable to hold her eyes. Her silence spoke louder than any words could. Her stillness felt like a judgment that weighed heavier than anything they had planned for her. Man who had recognized the mark earlier took another step back, his voice low as he muttered that there would be consequences for what had happened here, whether she chose to bring them or not. The meaning was clear. This was not a woman they could humiliate. This was someone who walked with a history they could not touch. Reached for her clothing slowly, every movement measured. She pulled the fabric back over her shoulders, her back disappearing from view, but the image of the tattoo remained Etched in the minds of everyone watching, it was not something they would forget, not tomorrow, not years from now. The silence in the courtyard deepened with each second. She stood there fully composed. When she stepped forward, the crowd parted instinctively. No one needed to be told to move. They created space for her without a single word. She walked past them, her step steady, her posture unshaken. She did not look left or right. She did not acknowledge the fear that followed her. She simply walked as though she had never been interrupted, as though this moment had been nothing more than a passing distraction. The leader kept his eyes on the ground, unable to meet hers as she passed by him, his hands clenched tightly at his sides, his voice gone. The people around him said nothing. They only watched as she left the courtyard, her calm presence leaving a silence behind that no one dared to break. When she was gone, the crowd remained frozen in place, the only sound the wind cutting softly through the open space. They all knew what they had seen, they all knew what it meant, and none of them would ever forget the day they tried to break her and instead discovered who she truly was. Morning came slow and gray, casting a pale light over the base that had become both refuge and cage for Lyra. She woke stiff and aching, her leg throbbing with every movement, but the fire inside her refused to dim. The war was far from over, and though the night had brought a brief respite, it had also deepened the weight of what lay ahead. She dressed slowly, pulling on her gear, feeling the familiar weight of her rifle and the worn fabric of her uniform, each piece a reminder of the battles fought and those yet to come. Outside the camp, the air was cold, carrying the scent of damp earth and smoke. The distant sounds of preparation reached her ears, soldiers moving with purpose, voices low but urgent, engines starting and radios crackling with orders. She stepped out into the chill, the sky a muted canvas, waiting for the sun to burn through and bring clarity to the uncertain day. Her commanding officer approached quickly, his face grim but resolute. He handed her a fresh set of orders. Their mission was clear: to push forward, to reclaim lost ground, and to gather intelligence on enemy movements. The plan was dangerous but necessary, and Lyra knew that every decision carried the weight of lives on the line. She nodded her acceptance without hesitation, because in war hesitation was a luxury no one could afford. The team assembled quickly, a mix of seasoned veterans and fresh faces, some eyes wide with fear, others hardened by experience, but all sharing the same determination to survive and succeed. Lyra took her place among them, her presence a quiet anchor, a symbol of endurance forged in fire and silence. She gave them a brief word of encouragement, her voice steady and calm, telling them that courage was not the absence of fear, but the choice to face it anyway. As they moved out, the landscape unfolded around them, a patchwork of scorched earth and shattered buildings, a reminder of the battles that had raged and the lives that had been lost. Every step was careful, deliberate, scanning for signs of traps or ambushes. Every shadow held potential danger, but also possibility, and Lyra led the way, her eyes sharp, her instincts alive to the slightest movement, the wind carrying whispers of the past and warnings of the present. Thor's past in a tense rhythm, broken only by the occasional crack of gunfire or the distant boom of explosions signaling clashes far beyond their immediate path. The sun climbed higher, burning away the morning mist and casting sharp light on the scars of war. The heat was oppressive, but Lyra welcomed it, a harsh reminder that life went on even in the darkest places, that the world continued turning, and so must they. They reached the outskirts of the village, the air thick with the smell of smoke and decay, buildings blackened and hollowed like ghosts standing sentinel over memories of violence and loss. Lyra's heart tightened, but she pushed the pain down, focusing on the task ahead, scanning the horizon for any sign of the enemy or a chance to turn the tide further in their favor. Suddenly a movement flickered at the edge of her vision, a flash of something too fast, too deliberate to be the wind. She signaled the team to halt, eyes narrowing. She raised her rifle and aimed at the source. The seconds stretched taut as the figure stepped into view, a young enemy combatant frozen in the moment between decision and action, and with a steady breath Lyra prepared for what would come next. Figure hesitated just long enough for Lyra to take in every detail, the youthful face streaked with dirt and fear, the trembling hands clutching a rifle too large for someone so small, the eyes wide, not with hatred but with something like desperation and confusion. She saw in that moment Not an enemy, but a scared kid caught in a war he never asked for, a life twisted by circumstances beyond his control, and her finger tightened on the trigger not out of malice, but out of necessity, the weight of survival pressing down like a stone. In her chest, shot rang out sharp and clean, breaking the silence, and the boy crumpled into the dust. A flash of regret flickered across Lyra's mind, but there was no time for hesitation, no space for doubt. The mission demanded focus, and every choice came with a cost. The team moved forward, quickly securing the area while she scanned the horizon for more threats, each step a dance with danger, a test of nerves and skill. The war was relentless, and so were they as they advanced deeper into the village. The remnants of life lingered in broken fragments, a child's shoe half buried in rubble, faded photographs fluttering on cracked walls, the smell of smoke and loss hanging thick in the air. Lyra's thoughts drifted briefly to her own family, to the life she had left behind, the dreams she had sacrificed for duty, and the quiet moments of peace that felt more precious than ever. Suddenly, a sharp cry pierced the tension. A teammate had fallen caught in a hidden trap, a landmine cleverly concealed beneath the rubble. The explosion threw dust and debris into the air, and chaos erupted in a heartbeat. But Lyra stayed steady, moving toward the wounded with hands sure and calm. She called for medics, her voice cutting through the noise. A lifeline amidst the storm, the team rallied around the injured man, forming a shield of determination, and happy moments that followed stretched thin as the medics worked quickly, stabilizing the wound and preparing for evacuation. Lyra kept watch, her rifle sweeping the perimeter, scanning for signs of an enemy counterattack. The village was silent again, but she knew better than to trust silence. It was the calm before the storm, the pause before the next wave, and she was ready to meet it head-on. When the medics signaled ready, the team moved back, carefully retracing their steps through the devastated streets, each footfall measured, each breath controlled, the weight of loss mingling with the drive to survive, to fight for a future that seemed so fragile yet so vital to hold on to. As they reached the edge of the village, the sun began to dip low, casting long shadows that stretched like fingers across the cracked earth. Lyra glanced back once more at the ruined homes, the lives forever changed, and she felt a fierce resolve hardening inside her, a promise to herself and to those lost that their story would not be forgotten, that every sacrifice mattered. The extraction point came into view, the familiar hum of the helicopter a beacon in the fading light. The team broke into a run, leaving behind the ghosts of war, but carrying with them the scars and stories etched into their souls. And as Lyra climbed aboard, she allowed herself a breath, a moment to look back at the battlefield one last time before the door closed and the world outside faded into memory. The helicopter lifted off, slowly rising above the battered village, leaving behind the cracked streets and shattered dreams below. Lyra pressed her forehead against the cool metal wall, watching the earth fall away beneath her as the wind rushed past the open door. The noise of the rotors pounding in her ears matched the rapid beat of her heart, a rhythm of survival, a pulse that had carried her through hours of fear and fire, and now carried her away from the battlefield. For a moment, the world outside seemed distant, unreal, like a fading nightmare, but she knew it was real. Every scar, every loss, every choice etched deep into her soul. Flight back to base was tense, quiet, filled only with the soft murmurs of medics tending to the wounded and the occasional crackle of the radio updates from the front lines. Lyra's mind raced, replaying the day, the moments that had tested her beyond limits, the boy who had hesitated, the trap that had nearly ended a teammate, the bullet at sunset, the long hours pinned down and waiting, all woven together into a tapestry of pain and courage and resolve. She knew the war would continue long after this day was done, that the fight was far from over, but for now she allowed herself the small relief of breathing, letting the tension ease just a little. The base, the ground crew moved swiftly, guiding the helicopter to a halt and lowering the ramp. The team disembarked, tired, wounded, but unbroken, their footsteps heavy with exhaustion, but steady with purpose. Medics rushed forward to take the injured, while commanders gathered quickly to debrief. The information gathered during the mission was critical, details about enemy positions and tactics that would shape the next moves in a conflict that seemed endless, but every piece mattered. Every scrap of knowledge was a weapon. Lyra was led to the medical tents, her leg throbbing, but her Spirit resolute, she sat quietly as medics cleaned and dressed the wound. Once again, the familiar routine, a bitter reminder of the price she paid, but also a testament to survival, to endurance, to the strength that kept her fighting when others might have fallen. She caught sight of the faces around her, some marked by fatigue, others by fresh pain, but all sharing the same quiet determination, the silent bond of soldiers bound by experience and sacrifice. Later, as night fell, she found a moment alone under a sky heavy with stars, the cold air sharp against her skin. She traced the constellations, familiar from childhood, a connection to a world untouched by war, a world she dreamed of returning to someday, a future where the gun could be laid down and peace was not just a fleeting hope, but a lasting reality. She held on to that dream tightly, letting it fuel her resolve for the battles yet to come. Her thoughts drifted to her brother, to the family waiting somewhere beyond the war zones, to the life she fought for, and the promise she made to keep going no matter how dark the days, how heavy the losses, because every sunrise was a chance to change the story, to stand again, to fight again, to be more than just a survivor, but a bearer of hope. And as the camp settled into uneasy rest, Lyra closed her eyes, allowing the quiet to wash over her, the echoes of the day mingling with the promise of tomorrow. The war was far from over, but so was she still. The dawn broke slowly, painting the sky with pale hues of pink and gold. The battlefield that had been so fierce and unforgiving just hours before now lay quiet under the gentle touch of morning light. Lyra stood at the edge of the camp, her leg still aching, but her eyes sharp as she surveyed the horizon where smoke curled faintly in the distance, a reminder that the war was not yet done, but that today there was a moment to breathe, a moment to gather strength before the next storm. Soldiers around her moved with tired purpose, preparing for the next mission, repairing gear, sharing quiet words and stolen smiles that spoke of camaraderie and resilience. The weight of the past days hung heavy on all of them, but beneath the exhaustion, there was something else, something fierce and unyielding, the stubborn spark of life and hope that refused to be snuffed out no matter how dark the night, how relentless the enemy. Lyra's mind wandered back to the bullet at sunset, the single shot that had changed everything, that had bought precious time and shifted the tide in their favor. It was a symbol now not just of survival, but of defiance, of the will to fight against impossible odds. She felt the weight of that moment deep in her bones, knowing that every action carried meaning, every choice held power, and that even in the darkest times a single person could make all the difference. She thought of the faces she had seen, the comrades who had stood beside her, the young enemy she had faced, and the countless stories etched into the scars of this endless conflict, each one a testament to the complexity of war, to the blend of courage and tragedy that defined it. She carried those stories with her like armor, protecting her heart even as they reminded her of the cost. As the sun rose higher, the call came for the next briefing, a summons back into the whirlwind of strategy and struggle. Lyra took a deep breath, feeling the pulse of the camp around her, the hum of determination and duty, the unspoken promise that no one would be left behind, that they would keep pushing forward together through fire and shadow and pain. She adjusted her gear and checked her rifle, the familiar weight grounding her in the present, a reminder that while the past shaped her, the future was still unwritten, and that she had a part to play in the story yet to come. The war was far from over, but so was her fight, her resolve hardened like steel, forged in the heat of battle and tempered by the hope that one day peace would rise from the ash. Walking toward the command tent, she glanced once more at the horizon where the sun lit the smoke in hues of amber and rose, a silent vow echoing in her mind to keep standing, to keep fighting, to hold on to the belief that even in a world torn apart by war, a single bullet at sunset could change everything, and that every moment mattered in the long journey toward dawn.